The storm had come without warning, rolling across the Kansas plains like a dark wave swallowing the horizon. Lightning fractured the sky in jagged lines, while thunder shook the foundations of every building along Route 59. Most travelers had pulled off the road hours ago, seeking shelter in motels or gas stations, waiting for the fury to pass. But not Marcus Cole. He kept riding, his Harley cutting through sheets of rain, the water streaming off his leather jacket like a second skin. At 53 years old, Marcus had seen worse. He had ridden through desert sandstorms in Afghanistan, navigated mountain passes in Colorado during blizzards, and crossed the Mojave when temperatures exceeded 115 degrees. A Kansas thunderstorm was nothing more than an inconvenience, but even the most seasoned rider knows when to stop. The neon sign flickered through the curtain of rain, its pink and blue letters spelling out a single word that promised warmth and coffee. Rosie's Diner. Marcus had passed this place 100 times over the years, always on his way somewhere else, never stopping. Tonight was different. The lightning was getting closer, and even his pride had limits. He pulled into the gravel parking lot, the stones crunching beneath his tires, and killed the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, feeling the rain pound against his back, watching the windows of the diner glow with a soft amber light. Inside, he could see silhouettes moving, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Something about that simplicity made his chest tighten. He dismounted and walked toward the entrance, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the storm above. When he pushed open the door, a small bell chimed, and the warmth hit him like an embrace. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon grease filled his lungs. A jukebox in the corner played an old country song about highways and heartbreak. A few customers sat scattered across the booths, farmers mostly, their faces weathered by sun and soil. They glanced up at Marcus with curiosity, but no hostility. In small towns like this, bikers were neither novelty nor threat. They were just people passing through. Marcus chose a seat at the counter, hanging his wet jacket on the hook beneath the bar. His gray hair was plastered to his forehead, and water dripped from his beard onto the formica surface. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked around for someone to take his order. That was when he saw her. She was standing near the kitchen window, balancing 3 plates on one arm while reaching for a fourth with her free hand. Her uniform was slightly too big, the pale blue fabric hanging loose on her thin frame. Her hair, the color of autumn leaves, was pulled back in a hasty ponytail that was starting to come undone. She moved with the desperate efficiency of someone who had been working too long without a break, her eyes focused on the task at hand with an intensity that bordered on exhaustion. She could not have been older than 35, but there was something in the way she carried herself that suggested a lifetime of burdens. She delivered the plates to a booth of teenagers who barely acknowledged her, already distracted by their phones. Then she turned and noticed Marcus watching. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Then it was gone, replaced by the professional smile that waitresses wear like armor. She approached the counter, pulling a notepad from her apron pocket. Her name tag read Elena. "What can I get you?" she asked. Her voice was softer than Marcus had expected, with a slight tremor that could have been fatigue or something else entirely. "Coffee," Marcus replied. "Black, and whatever pie you recommend." Elena nodded and turned toward the coffee machine. Marcus noticed that her hands were trembling slightly as she poured. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes, visible even under the harsh fluorescent lights. He noticed the way she kept glancing at the clock on the wall, counting down the minutes until something. She set the coffee in front of him, followed by a slice of cherry pie that looked homemade. The crust was golden brown, perfectly crimped at the edges. Marcus took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter, exactly what he needed. "Long night," he said. It was not a question. Elena paused, her hand still resting on the counter. For a moment, Marcus thought she might ignore the comment, retreat into the safety of small talk and professional distance. But instead, she looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not attraction or romance, but something deeper. The recognition of two people who understood what it meant to carry weight that others could not see. "Every night is long," she said quietly. "Some are just longer than others." Before Marcus could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. A group of men stumbled in, their laughter too loud, their movements too deliberate. Marcus did not need to look closely to recognize trouble. 20 years in the military and another 15 riding with the Iron Brotherhood had taught him to read a room in seconds. These men were not dangerous, not exactly, but they were the type who enjoyed making others uncomfortable, the type who mistook cruelty for humor. There were 4 of them, all wearing expensive polo shirts and khaki pants that marked them as outsiders. Country club types, Marcus guessed, probably from the city, probably passing through on their way to somewhere that mattered more than this small town. They slid into a booth near the window, snapping their fingers to get Elena's attention. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out. His voice was dripping with condescension. "How about some service over here?" Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She grabbed 4 menus and walked over to their table, her posture stiff but controlled. Marcus watched the interaction from the corner of his eye, his hand tightening around his coffee cup. "What can I get for you, gentlemen?" Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral. The leader of the group, a man with slicked back hair and a gold watch that probably cost more than Elena made in a year, looked her up and down with an appraising gaze that made Marcus want to stand up. But he did not. Not yet. He had learned long ago that jumping into situations without understanding them usually made things worse. "Well," the man said, leaning back in his seat, "what do you recommend?" "And I'm not talking about the menu." His friends laughed as if this were the height of wit. Elena's face remained impassive, but Marcus could see her knuckles whitening around the edge of her notepad. "The cherry pie is popular," she said flatly. "I bet it is," the man replied with a smirk that made the implication clear. Something inside Marcus shifted. He had spent decades trying to control his temper, learning to pick his battles, understanding that not every slight required a response. But there were lines. There were always lines. And this man, with his expensive clothes and his casual cruelty, had just crossed one. Marcus stood up slowly, deliberately, letting his full height become apparent. At 6'3", with shoulders broadened by years of physical labor and a presence that commanded attention, he was not the kind of man most people wanted to antagonize. He walked over to the booth, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor, and stopped directly beside Elena. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of a threat that did not need to be spoken. The slicked hair man looked up at Marcus, his smirk faltering for just a moment before returning with false bravado. "This doesn't concern you, old man. Why don't you go back to your coffee and mind your own business?" Marcus did not move. He did not blink. He simply stood there, a wall of leather and muscle and quiet authority, waiting. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. The other customers in the diner had stopped eating, stopped talking, their attention fixed on the confrontation. Finally, the slicked hair man looked away. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly very interested in the menus they had not bothered to open. "Whatever," the man muttered. "This place is a dump anyway. Let's go somewhere else." They stood up and shuffled toward the door, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. Just before he left, the leader turned back and pointed at Elena. "We'll be leaving a review online," he said. "Enjoy your 1-star rating, sweetheart." The door slammed shut behind them, and the bell chimed a discordant note that hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus turned to Elena, who was standing very still, her notepad clutched to her chest like a shield. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. "I'm used to it," she said. "It comes with the job." "It shouldn't," Marcus replied. Elena looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment her carefully constructed walls seemed to waver. "Thank you," she whispered. "Most people just watch." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude he did not feel he had earned. "I've got a daughter," he said, "somewhere out there. Haven't seen her in 15 years. but I'd hoped that if she was ever in a situation like that, someone would step up for her too. Elena's expression softened. That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a long time. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, and Marcus returned to his seat at the counter. The coffee had gone cold, but he did not mind. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, something had shifted. Some invisible connection had been made, and neither of them knew yet how much that connection would change their lives. Marcus finished his pie slowly, watching Elena work. She moved from table to table with a grace born of necessity, refilling coffee cups and taking orders and smiling at customers who barely noticed her existence. He wondered about her story. Everyone had one. The woman working the night shift at a roadside diner in the middle of Kansas did not get there by accident. There was a history behind those tired eyes, a reason for the way she counted her tips with such desperate precision, a secret hidden beneath the surface of her ordinary life. When the clock struck 11, Elena walked over to the counter and handed Marcus his bill. "On the house," she said, "for what you did earlier." Marcus shook his head and pulled out his wallet. "I don't take charity, and besides, it was just common decency." "Common decency is rarer than you think," Elena replied. Marcus left a $50 bill on the counter, more than 10 times the cost of his meal. He stood up and put on his jacket, still damp from the rain. Elena stared at the money, her eyes widening. "I can't accept this," she said. "It's not for you," Marcus replied. "It's for whoever needs it more than I do." He walked toward the door, but Elena's voice stopped him. "Wait." He turned around. "The storm," she said. "It's not safe to ride in this. There's a motel about half a mile down the road, the Sunflower Inn. Tell Martha that Elena sent you. She'll give you a good rate." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." He pushed open the door and stepped back into the rain, but before he mounted his bike, he looked back through the window of the diner. Elena was still standing at the counter, holding the $50 bill, staring at it as if it were something precious, something rare. And in that moment, Marcus made a decision. He was going to find out her story. Not because he was curious and not because he wanted something in return, but because in all his years of riding, in all the miles he had covered and the people he had met, he had learned to recognize when someone was drowning. And Elena, with her tired eyes and her trembling hands and her carefully hidden tears, was going under. And Marcus Cole, for all his faults and failures, had never been able to watch someone drown without throwing them a rope. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because every story we tell is a reminder that kindness still exists, that courage still matters, and that sometimes the people who seem the toughest are the ones with the softest hearts. Subscribe now so you never miss a moment when humanity surprises us. Chapter 2. The Sunflower Inn was exactly what Marcus had expected. A single-story building with faded yellow paint and a flickering vacancy sign that buzzed like an angry insect. Martha, the owner, was a heavy-set woman in her 60s with a cigarette perpetually dangling from her lips and a voice that sounded like gravel being poured through a funnel. When Marcus mentioned Elena's name, something softened in Martha's weathered face. "You met our Elena," she said, handing him a room key attached to a plastic sunflower keychain. "That girl works harder than anyone I've ever known. 3 jobs, you know. The diner, the grocery store during the day, and cleaning houses on weekends. Never complains, never asks for help, just keeps going." Marcus took the key but did not move. 3 jobs, he repeated. Martha nodded, her expression growing somber. Her husband passed away 4 years ago. Car accident. Left her with nothing but debts and a 10-year-old boy to raise. She sold everything. The house, the car, every piece of jewelry she owned. Paid off what she could, and moved into that tiny apartment above the hardware store. Been fighting to survive ever since. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He knew what it meant to lose everything. He knew what it felt like to rebuild from the ashes of a life that had burned down around you. But he also knew that some fires were too big to fight alone. "The boy," he said. "What's his name?" "Jake." Martha smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across her face. Sweetest kid you'll ever meet. Quiet, but smart as a whip. Reminds me of his father. Same eyes, same gentle soul. Marcus thanked her and headed to his room. It was small and sparse, with a bed that sagged in the middle and a television that looked like it belonged in a museum. But it was dry and warm, and that was enough. He lay down on the mattress, listening to the rain drum against the window, and thought about Elena. About the way she had said every night is long. About the way she had looked at that $50 bill like it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Sleep did not come easily. It rarely did for Marcus. His mind was a battlefield, littered with the ghosts of decisions made and roads not taken. He thought about his daughter, about the last time he had seen her face. She had been 18 then, standing on the porch of her mother's house, telling him that she never wanted to see him again. That she was tired of waiting for a father who was always leaving, that she was done. He had tried to explain, tried to make her understand that the road was not an escape, but a necessity, that something inside him was broken, something that could not be fixed by staying in one place. But words had never been his strength. He had ridden away that night, watching her shrink in his rearview mirror until she disappeared entirely. He had not been back since. The rain continued through the night, finally tapering off around dawn. Marcus rose early, showered in water that alternated between scalding and freezing, and dressed in clothes that were still slightly damp. He checked out of the motel, thanking Martha for her hospitality, and rode back toward the diner. He told himself it was just for breakfast, just for coffee. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted to see Elena again. He wanted to understand. Rosie's diner looked different in the morning light. The neon sign was off, replaced by the gentle glow of sunshine filtering through the windows. The parking lot was fuller now, pickup trucks and sedans belonging to the breakfast crowd. Marcus parked his bike and walked inside, the familiar bell announcing his arrival. Elena was not there. Instead, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for a row of customers who looked like they had been regulars since before Marcus was born. She noticed him standing in the doorway and smiled. "Sit anywhere you like, hun. I'll be right with you." Marcus chose the same seat at the counter he had occupied the night before. When the older woman came over, he asked for coffee and scrambled eggs. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked about Elena. The woman's smile flickered. "Elena works the night shift," she said. "Won't be in until 6. Everything okay?" "Just wanted to thank her," Marcus replied. "She recommended this place." The woman nodded, but her eyes lingered on him with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something that looked like hope. "You're the one from last night," she said. "The one who stood up to those city boys. Word travels fast. Small town." She extended her hand. "I'm Rosie. This is my place." Marcus shook her hand, surprised by the strength of her grip. "Pleasure to meet you." Rosie leaned against the counter, her arms crossed over her chest. "Elena told me what you did. Said you made those men leave without raising a fist. That takes a special kind of strength." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Rosie said quietly, "they wouldn't. That's the problem with the world today. Everyone watches, nobody acts. But you did. And I want you to know how much that means. Elena, she's like a daughter to me. Been working here since she was 16 years old. I watched her grow up, get married, have that beautiful boy. And I watched her world fall apart when Daniel died. She's been putting herself back together ever since, piece by piece. But some days I worry the pieces don't fit anymore." Marcus listened without interrupting. He had learned long ago that sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was simply to listen. "There's something she doesn't talk about," Rosie continued. "Something she keeps locked away so tight I don't think even she looks at it most days. But I've seen the way she checks the mail every day with that look in her eyes, like she's waiting for something. Or dreading it. I don't know which." Marcus nodded slowly. "We all have things we don't talk about." Rosie studied him for a long moment. "I suppose we do," she said. "Your eggs will be right out." She walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He ate his breakfast slowly, watching the morning crowd come and go. Farmers talking about the weather and crop prices. A young couple holding hands across a table, lost in each other's eyes. A mother trying to corral 3 children who seemed determined to turn the diner into a playground. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. And somewhere in this town, Elena was doing the same. Working her 3 jobs, raising her son, carrying her secret burden without complaint. Marcus finished his coffee and left another generous tip on the counter. He walked outside into the morning sunshine, the air still fresh from the previous night's rain. He could leave now, get back on his bike and continue his journey to nowhere in particular. That was what he had always done. Keep moving. Never stay long enough to get attached. Never let anyone close enough to hurt him again. But something held him back. Something in the way Elena had looked at him. Something in the way Rosie had said she keeps checking the mail. Something that whispered to him that maybe, just maybe, this was the place he was supposed to be. He spent the day exploring the town, a community so small it barely registered on most maps. Main Street was 6 blocks long, lined with brick buildings that had been standing since before World War II. There was a hardware store, a grocery market, a barber shop with a spinning pole out front, and a single-screen movie theater that was showing a film Marcus had never heard of. At the end of the street stood a white church with a steeple that reached toward the sky like a prayer made manifest. Marcus parked his bike and walked. He talked to shopkeepers and nodded at strangers who nodded back. He learned that the town was called Millbrook, that it had once been a thriving agricultural hub before the big corporate farms moved in and squeezed out the family operations. Now it was mostly old-timers hanging on to memories and young people counting the days until they could leave. He learned about Daniel Torres, Elena's late husband, a mechanic who had run his own shop on the edge of town, a man who volunteered at the fire department and coached Little League and never met a stranger he couldn't turn into a friend. He had died on a rainy night, much like the one Marcus had ridden through, his car hydroplaning on the highway, flipping twice before coming to rest in a ditch. He had been 32 years old. Marcus learned about Jake, the boy who looked like his father and carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed beyond his 14 years. He was a good student, his teacher said, quiet but observant. He spent most of his free time at the library, reading books about science and history and places far away from Kansas. He never complained about the things he didn't have. He just accepted what was and made the best of it. And Marcus learned about Elena's secret. Not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to understand why she worked so hard and smiled so little. Enough to know that she was fighting a battle that no one in this town could help her win. Enough to realize that the weight she carried was heavier than anyone imagined. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, Marcus was sitting at the counter of Rosie's diner, a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, waiting. The evening shift was just starting, the dinner crowd beginning to trickle in, and then the door opened, and Elena walked through. She looked different in the harsh light of day that was fading into evening. The exhaustion was still there, etched into the lines around her eyes, but there was something else too. A determination that bordered on defiance. She was wearing the same uniform, slightly wrinkled now, her hair pulled back in the same hasty ponytail. When she saw Marcus, she stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. "You came back," she said. "I told you the pie was good." Elena almost smiled. Almost. She walked behind the counter and tied on her apron, her movements automatic and practiced. "You didn't have to do that, you know. Last night. I've dealt with worse." "I know," Marcus replied, "but you shouldn't have to." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "Why are you still here?" Marcus considered lying, considered making up some story about mechanical trouble or a change of plans. But something about Elena made dishonesty feel impossible, like she could see through any facade he tried to construct. "I've been writing for a long time," he said slowly. "Running, really, from things I didn't want to face, places I couldn't stay, people I couldn't help. But last night, when I walked into this diner, something felt different, like maybe I'd been riding towards something instead of away. I don't know what that means yet, but I figured I'd stick around long enough to find out. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she reached for the coffee pot and refilled his cup. "That's either the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me," she said, "or the best line I've ever heard." "It's not a line." "I know." She set the pot down and leaned against the counter. "That's what scares me." The evening passed slowly. Marcus watched Elena work, marveling at the way she navigated the chaos with grace and efficiency. She remembered every customer's name, asked about their families, laughed at their jokes even when they were not funny. She was good at her job, genuinely good, and Marcus found himself wondering how someone so talented had ended up trapped in a life of endless work and invisible struggle. Around 9 o'clock, the door opened and a boy walked in. He was tall for his age, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to hold a wisdom beyond his years. He was carrying a backpack stuffed with books and wearing a jacket that was slightly too small. When he saw Elena, his face lit up with a smile that transformed him completely. "Mom," he called out, weaving between tables to reach the counter. Elena's entire demeanor changed. The exhaustion melted away, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep inside her. "Hey, baby," she said, reaching out to ruffle his hair. "How was school?" "Good. We're starting a new project in science class. I'm going to build a model of the solar system." "That sounds amazing. Did you eat dinner?" "Mrs. Patterson made me a sandwich." Elena nodded, but Marcus could see the guilt flicker across her face. The guilt of a mother who could not be there to make her own son dinner, who had to rely on the kindness of neighbors to fill the gaps she could not cover. Jake noticed Marcus watching and extended his hand with a formality that seemed both charming and heartbreaking. "Hi," he said. "I'm Jake." Marcus shook the boy's hand. "Marcus. Nice to meet you, Jake. Are you a friend of my mom's?" Marcus glanced at Elena, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "I'm trying to be," he said. Jake nodded seriously. "Good. She could use more friends." The simple honesty of the statement hit Marcus harder than he expected. He looked at Elena, who was blinking rapidly, her jaw tight with the effort of holding back tears, and in that moment, he made a decision. He was not going to ride away this time. He was not going to disappear into the horizon and pretend this town and these people did not exist. Whatever secret Elena was keeping, whatever battle she was fighting, he was going to help. Not because she asked, not because he expected anything in return, but because after decades of running, he had finally found something worth standing still for. Chapter 3. 3 days passed. Marcus rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a rustic structure with a wood stove and a porch that looked out over endless fields of wheat. He spent his mornings working on his bike, tuning the engine and polishing the chrome until it gleamed in the sunlight. He spent his afternoons walking through Millbrook, becoming a familiar face in a community that welcomed strangers with cautious warmth. And he spent his evenings at Rosie's Diner, drinking coffee and watching Elena work. They talked when she had time, brief conversations between orders and refills, fragments of a larger story that was slowly coming into focus. Marcus learned that Elena had been born in this town, had never lived anywhere else. She had met Daniel in high school, married him at 19, had Jake at 21. For 13 years, they had built a life together. A small life, perhaps, by the standards of the wider world, but a good one, a happy one. Then the accident. And everything changed. Marcus told her about himself, too. About his time in the Marines, the friends he had lost, the things he had seen that still haunted his dreams. About his failed marriage and the daughter who wanted nothing to do with him. About the day he had bought his first motorcycle and discovered that movement was the only thing that quieted the noise in his head. He did not tell her everything, not yet, but he told her enough. Enough to let her know that he understood what it meant to carry weight. On the 4th night, something different happened. Elena's shift ended at midnight, and instead of disappearing immediately like she usually did, she lingered. She sat down across from Marcus with a cup of tea and looked at him with eyes that held both fear and determination. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Marcus waited. Elena took a deep breath. "Jake is sick." The words hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "It started about a year ago," Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Headaches at first. Then dizziness. Then he started having trouble with his vision. I took him to the doctor in town, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong, so I took him to Kansas City to a specialist. They ran tests. So many tests." She paused, her hands wrapped around her teacup so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "There's a growth," she said, "in his brain. It's not cancer, thank God, but it's pressing on things, important things. If they don't remove it, he could lose his sight. Maybe worse." Marcus did not speak. There were no words adequate for a moment like this. "The surgery," Elena continued. "It's complicated, expensive. The specialist in Kansas City, he's good, but he's not good enough. There's a doctor in Boston, one of the best in the world. He's done this surgery hundreds of times. He thinks he can help Jake, but the cost." She laughed bitterly. "Insurance won't cover most of it. They call it experimental. Can you believe that? My son's life, and they call it experimental." "How much?" Marcus asked quietly. Elena looked at him. $200,000. The number hung between them like a wall, an impossible sum for a waitress in a small Kansas town, an amount that would take decades to earn, even with 3 jobs and no expenses. "I've been saving," Elena said, "every penny I can scrape together. I've sold everything that was worth anything. I've begged and borrowed and prayed, but I'm still short, so short. And the doctor, he said we can't wait much longer. The growth is getting bigger. Every day we delay, the risk goes up." She was crying now, tears streaming silently down her face, her shoulders shaking with the effort of containing a grief too large for her body. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't know how to save my son." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. It was trembling like a leaf in a storm. He held it gently but firmly, an anchor in the chaos. "How much do you have?" he asked. Elena wiped her eyes with her free hand. "About 70,000. It took me 4 years to save that. And I need 130 more. In 8 weeks. That's when the doctor has an opening. That's our window. After that, he said he can't guarantee anything." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The jukebox played a soft melody in the background. The diner was empty except for them, the overhead lights casting long shadows across the floor. "I want to help," he said finally. Elena shook her head. "No, I didn't tell you this to ask for money. I don't want charity. It's not charity." Marcus's voice was firm. "It's a father who couldn't save his own child trying to help another mother save hers. It's someone who's been given more second chances than he deserves trying to pay it forward. It's one human being helping another because that's what we're supposed to do." Elena stared at him, her eyes red and swollen, her face a map of hope and fear and exhaustion. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care?" "Because someone should. Because Jake is a good kid who deserves a chance. Because you've spent 4 years fighting alone, and you shouldn't have to fight alone anymore." Elena was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Marcus squeezed her hand. "We're going to figure this out. I don't know how yet, but we will." It was a promise. The kind of promise Marcus had not made in years. The kind of promise that required him to stay, to commit, to be something more than a shadow passing through. And as he looked at Elena, at this woman who had carried an impossible burden with impossible grace, he knew that keeping this promise was the most important thing he had ever done. If you are watching this right now and you have ever known what it feels like to fight for someone you love, I want you to leave a comment saying, "I know that fight." Just those 4 words. because sometimes knowing that others understand is enough to keep us going. Chapter 4. The next morning, Marcus made a phone call he had been avoiding for 15 years. He stood on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun rise over the wheat fields, and dialed a number he had memorized but never used. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Hello. The voice was older now, deeper, but still unmistakably familiar. It was the voice of Tommy Reeves, his oldest friend, the man who had served beside him in 2 wars and ridden beside him on 1,000 highways. The man who had stood as best man at his wedding and godfather at his daughter's christening. The man Marcus had pushed away along with everyone else when the darkness had become too much to share. Tommy, Marcus said, it's me. Silence. Then, slowly, Marcus. After all this time. I know. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't cover 15 years of silence. No, it doesn't. But I'm calling now. And I need your help. Another pause. What kind of help? Marcus told him everything. About Millbrook and the diner and Elena and Jake. About the surgery and the money and the impossible deadline. He spoke for 15 minutes without interruption, pouring out words he had kept locked inside for years. When he finished, Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed softly. You always were a sucker for a lost cause, he said. This isn't a lost cause. It's a kid who deserves a chance. I know. I'm in. Just like that? Just like that. You called after 15 years of radio silence asking for help. That means it matters. And the Iron Brotherhood doesn't turn its back on things that matter. How much do you need? 130,000. In 8 weeks. Tommy whistled. That's a lot of money. I know. But I also know what the Brotherhood is capable of when it sets its mind to something. You want to mobilize the whole network? I want to save a boy's life, whatever that takes. Tommy was silent for a moment. Then, give me 48 hours. I'll make some calls. Thank you, Tommy. I mean it. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we have the money in hand. He hung up, and Marcus stood there on the porch, feeling something he had not felt in years. Hope. Terrifying, fragile hope. The kind that could lift you up or destroy you depending on how the wind blew. 2 days later, Tommy called back. The news was better than Marcus had dared to dream. I've got commitments from 12 chapters so far, Tommy said. Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Nebraska, Colorado. Even got a call from a chapter in Texas that heard through the grapevine and wanted in. We're looking at about 40,000 already, and I haven't even scratched the surface yet. 40,000, Marcus repeated, stunned. That's just the beginning. I've got guys organizing fundraisers all over the Midwest. Charity rides, poker runs, auctions. We've got a mechanic in Wichita who's donating a custom build worth 15,000. A tattoo parlor in Topeka is doing a weekend where all proceeds go to Jake's fund. This thing is taking on a life of its own, brother. People want to help. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Why? Because that's what we do. We take care of our own. And right now, this kid is one of ours. Marcus hung up the phone and walked back into town. He found Elena at the grocery store, stocking shelves between her morning shift and her afternoon shift, her movements mechanical and exhausted. Can you take a break? He asked. She looked up, surprised. I've got 15 minutes. They walked to a bench outside the store, sitting in the shade of an old oak tree. Marcus told her about Tommy, about the Iron Brotherhood, about the money that was already being raised. He watched her face transform from confusion to disbelief to a hope so raw it was almost painful to witness. I don't understand, she said. These people don't even know me. They know me, Marcus replied, and they know what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. That's the thing about brotherhood. It doesn't ask questions. It just shows up. Elena was crying again, but these were different tears. Tears of relief. Tears of gratitude. Tears of a woman who had been drowning for 4 years and was finally being thrown a rope. How can I ever repay this? She asked. You don't. Marcus shook his head. That's not how it works. You accept the help, you save your son, And then someday, when you see someone else drowning, you throw them a rope. That's the whole point. That's what makes us human. Elena took a shaky breath. When I first saw you walk into that diner, do you know what I thought? What? I thought you looked like trouble, like the kind of man who leaves wreckage wherever he goes. She smiled through her tears. I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. Marcus smiled back, a genuine smile that felt strange and unfamiliar on his face. That's the thing about first impressions, he said. They're almost always incomplete. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. The fundraising campaign exploded. What started as a network of bikers reaching into their pockets became a viral phenomenon. A local news station picked up the story, then a national one. People from all over the country began donating. $5 here, $50 there, $1,000 from a stranger in California who had lost his own son to a similar condition and wanted to help save another. The Iron Brotherhood organized a massive charity ride that drew over 300 bikers from 6 states. They rode into Millbrook like a leather-clad army, their engines shaking the windows of every building on Main Street. The townspeople came out to watch, waving and cheering, children sitting on their father's shoulders to get a better view. Marcus rode at the front, Tommy beside him, the wind in their faces and purpose in their hearts. They raised $20,000 that day, and the momentum kept building. Jake became a minor celebrity in his own right. News crews came to interview him, asking how it felt to have so many strangers fighting for his future. He answered with the quiet dignity that had already become his trademark. It feels like maybe the world isn't as scary as I thought, he said. Like maybe there are more good people than bad people. Like maybe everything is going to be okay. Marcus watched the interview from the back of the room, his heart swelling with something he could not quite name. Pride, maybe. Or something deeper, something that felt like redemption. 6 weeks in, they had raised $110,000, $20,000 short with 2 weeks to go. It was incredible progress, but the deadline loomed like a storm on the horizon. We'll make it, Tommy said during one of their nightly phone calls. I've got a few more irons in the fire, and if we don't, then we keep trying. We don't stop until that boy gets his surgery. Marcus believed him. For the first time in decades, he believed that good things were possible, that broken people could come together and do something beautiful, that his life, which had felt so aimless for so long, had finally found a purpose worth pursuing. But the universe, as Marcus knew all too well, had a cruel sense of timing, and just when everything seemed to be falling into place, the other shoe dropped. Chapter 5. It started with a phone call. Marcus was sitting in his cabin, reviewing the latest fundraising numbers, when his cell phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered it without thinking. Is this Marcus Cole? Speaking. Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Harrison from Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm calling about Jacob Torres. Marcus felt his blood run cold. What's wrong? We've been monitoring Jake's condition remotely, based on the scans his local doctor has been sending us. I'm afraid the growth has accelerated. The timeline we discussed is no longer viable. What does that mean? It means we can't wait 8 weeks. We need to operate within the next 10 days, or the risks become unacceptable. 10 days. They were still $20,000 short. $20,000 that now seemed as distant as the moon. But there's something else, Dr. Harrison continued. I've been following Jake's story online. The fundraising campaign, the community support. It's remarkable, so I spoke with the hospital board this morning. We've agreed to cover the remaining costs. Marcus could not speak, could not breathe, could not process what he was hearing. Mr. Cole? Are you there? I'm here, Marcus finally managed. Are you serious? Completely serious. Jake's surgery is scheduled for next Thursday. We're covering the shortfall. All Elena needs to do is get Jake to Boston by Wednesday evening. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling tears stream down his face for the first time in years. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. He hung up and immediately drove to the diner. Elena was working the lunch shift, balancing plates and taking orders with her usual efficiency. When she saw Marcus's face, she froze. What's wrong? She asked, her voice barely audible. "Nothing's wrong." Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "The hospital called. They're covering the rest. Jake's surgery is next Thursday." Elena stared at him. For a long moment she did not move, did not speak, did not blink. Then slowly, her legs buckled. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, holding her up as sobs racked her entire body. The diner went silent. Every customer, every employee, watched as Elena Torres, the woman who had carried an impossible burden with impossible grace for 4 years, finally let go. Finally allowed herself to hope. Finally allowed herself to believe that her son was going to be okay. Rosie was there in an instant, wrapping her arms around Elena, crying right along with her. Other customers stood up, strangers who had become invested in this story, wiping their own eyes and murmuring words of congratulation and relief. Marcus stepped back, letting Elena be surrounded by the community that had rallied around her. He watched from the doorway, his heart fuller than it had ever been. This was what it meant to be human, not the darkness and the pain and the endless running, but this: connection, support, love in its purest form. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Marcus coordinated with Tommy to arrange transportation. They would ride to Boston in a convoy, a show of support that had grown far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Over 100 bikers signed up to make the journey, coming from as far away as Florida and Oregon. The news coverage intensified, transforming Jake's story into a national conversation about community and compassion and the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Elena took time off from all 3 of her jobs for the first time in 4 years. She spent every moment with Jake, talking to him about the surgery, about the future, about all the things they would do once this was behind them. "You're going to be okay," she told him over and over. "You're going to be okay." "I know, Mom," Jake replied with a maturity that belied his 14 years. "I'm not scared." "You're not?" Jake shook his head. "How can I be scared when so many people are pulling for me? When Mr. Marcus and his friends rode all this way just to help?" He smiled, a smile that held all the light in the world. "I think Dad is watching over us. I think he sent these people to help." Elena pulled her son close, holding him tight, feeling his heart beat against her chest. "I think you might be right," she whispered. Wednesday morning arrived, crisp and clear. The convoy assembled in the parking lot of Rosie's diner, a sea of chrome and leather that stretched as far as the eye could see. Marcus stood at the front, his bike gleaming in the morning light. Elena and Jake in the passenger car that Tommy had arranged for the journey. The whole town came out to see them off, farmers and shopkeepers and teachers and children, lining the streets like it was a parade. They held signs that said, "We love you, Jake, and Millbrook believes." They cheered and clapped and cried, watching as the convoy roared to life and began its long journey east. Marcus rode at the head of the pack, the road stretching before him like a promise. Behind him, 100 engines hummed in unison, a symphony of solidarity that drowned out the silence of the years he had spent running. Beside him, Elena watched the Kansas plains give way to rolling hills and forests, her hand on Jake's shoulder, her eyes fixed on the horizon. They rode through towns that had heard their story, past diners and gas stations where people stood outside and waved. They rode through rain and sunshine, through day and night, stopping only when absolutely necessary. And as they drew closer to Boston, something shifted in the air, something that felt like destiny. Thursday morning, they arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Harrison met them in the lobby, shaking hands with Marcus and Elena and kneeling down to look Jake in the eye. "You ready, champ?" Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Let's do this." The surgery took 7 hours. 7 hours that felt like 7 years. Marcus and Elena and Tommy and dozens of other bikers crowded into the waiting room, unable to sit, unable to stand still. They paced and prayed and held each other through the endless minutes. When Dr. Harrison finally emerged still in his scrubs, his face was impossible to read. Elena stood up, her legs shaking. "Is he okay?" Harrison smiled. "He's more than okay. The surgery was a complete success." We got everything. Jake is going to make a full recovery. The waiting room exploded. Bikers who had faced down danger without flinching burst into tears. Strangers embraced like lifelong friends. Elena collapsed into Marcus's arms, sobbing with a relief so profound it seemed to emanate from her very soul. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Marcus held her tight, his own eyes wet, his own heart overflowing. This was why he had stopped running. This was what all those years on the road had been leading to. Not escape, not oblivion. But this moment, this connection, this family he had never expected to find. He thought of his daughter, somewhere out there, still angry, still hurt. He thought of all the years he had wasted, all the bridges he had burned, and he made a silent vow. When this was over, he would reach out to her. He would try again. He would be the father he should have been all along. Because if there was one thing Jake's story had taught him, it was this. It was never too late to fight for the people you loved. Chapter 6. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the porch of his cabin, watching the Kansas sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. So much had changed since that stormy night when he had walked into Rosie's diner. So much had healed. Jake had made a full recovery, just as Dr. Harrison had promised. He was back in school now, his grades better than ever, his future bright and limitless. He had started a blog about his experience, sharing his story with thousands of followers who had been touched by his journey. He talked about gratitude and courage and the importance of asking for help when you need it. He talked about the bikers who had become his extended family, the strangers who had become his friends. Elena had finally allowed herself to breathe. With the medical debts behind her, she had been able to cut back to a single job. She was managing Rosie's diner now, a promotion that came with better hours and better pay. The exhaustion that had haunted her eyes for so long was fading, replaced by something that looked like peace. And Marcus. Marcus had stopped running. He had stayed in Millbrook, settling into the small town like he had been born there. He helped out at the diner when they were short-staffed. He organized charity rides for other families facing medical crises. He mentored young men who reminded him of himself at that age, lost and angry and searching for something to believe in. He had even reconnected with his daughter. It had started with a letter, handwritten and honest, explaining everything he should have explained years ago. She had not responded immediately. But eventually, cautiously, she had reached out. They talked on the phone now, once a week, feeling their way toward a relationship that both of them desperately wanted, but neither quite knew how to build. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was real. And for Marcus, that was enough. The screen door creaked open, and Elena stepped onto the porch beside him. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee, steam rising into the cool evening air. She handed one to Marcus and stood beside him, their shoulders almost touching, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "Yeah, it is." They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment. Then Elena spoke again. "I never properly thanked you," she said, "for everything." Marcus shook his head. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That night, when you walked into the diner, I was at the end of my rope. I had been fighting for so long, alone for so long, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. And then you showed up. This stranger on a motorcycle who refused to look away when everyone else did. You changed everything. You changed everything yourself. I just helped." Elena smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "No, you didn't just help. You showed me that there were still good people in the world. People who care about strangers. People who fight for what's right even when there's nothing in it for them. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what hope felt like." Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. Something that felt like home. "I spent 30 years running," he said quietly. "Running from pain, running from responsibility, running from everyone who tried to get close. And then I met you, and Jake. And I realized that running was never the answer. The answer was standing still. The answer was letting people in. The answer was finding something worth fighting for. Elena reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm and gentle, an anchor in the chaos of a world that so often felt overwhelming. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. At this woman who had carried an impossible burden with impossible grace. At this woman who had taught him that strength was not about pushing people away, but about letting them in. "Now," he said, "we live. We take care of each other. We help the next person who needs it. And we never, ever stop fighting for the people we love." Elena squeezed his hand. "I can live with that." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who had found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances. Two people who had learned that family was not defined by blood, but by choice. Two people who had discovered that the deepest connections often came from the most unlikely places. In the distance, the sound of a motorcycle engine rumbled through the evening air. Tommy was coming over for dinner, bringing some of the brothers from the local chapter. They would eat and laugh and share stories, building memories that would last a lifetime. Marcus smiled. For the first time in decades, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not running, not hiding, but standing, fighting, living. And it all started with a single act of kindness on a rainy night in the middle of nowhere. The storm had passed, the sun was shining, and the road ahead stretched out like a promise, full of possibility and hope. That is the true story of the single biker who stopped to help a waitress in the rain. Her secret reason left him in tears, but it also changed his life forever. It taught him that the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that transform entire communities. It showed him that no matter how lost you feel, there is always a way back home. If you watch this far, it is because this story touched something inside you. Maybe you have fought a similar battle. Maybe you know someone who is fighting right now, or maybe you just needed to be reminded that good people still exist in this world. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far." Let me know that you are out there, that you believe in the power of community and compassion, that you understand why stories like this matter. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already. Because every story on this channel is a reminder that we are not alone, that someone out there cares, that together we can face anything. Give this video a like if it moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more we spread these stories, the more we remind the world what it means to be human. And remember, the next time you see someone struggling, the next time you have the chance to help a stranger, take it. You never know how that single act of kindness might change everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. Until next time, keep your heart open and your eyes on the road. The journey continues.